Let's go right into it. And let's talk about wolves. Obviously, there was a recent court ruling in Wyoming's gray wolf management policies on hold. Governor Meade criticized the ruling, and yourself as well, as a symptom of what's wrong with the Endangered Species Act. And what do you think should be done about the act? And what, if anything, would you do about it, or the wolf matter in particular?
Well, several times we've almost gotten a change to the Endangered Species Act. It required that before anything could be considered endangered, there had to be a plan for its recovery, and it had to have specific landmarks in it for knowing if the recovery is taking place and at what point it would be considered to have already happened. I'm proud to be from Wyoming. We're probably the only state that's ever saved an extinct species. The black-footed ferret was discovered up by Matitsi. The state went to a lot of expense to capture those animals and put them in a special facility down by between Wheatland and Laramie, and those have been reintroduced into the wild and are doing very well now. We've had some landmarks on grizzly bears. We've exceeded those several times. They keep moving the bar on them. On wolves, very distressing. Even in the judge's decision, she said that she realized that Wyoming had been doing a good job, that there was an increase in the number of wolves, there was an increase in the number of mating pairs, and there were less conflicts. That's what the purpose of the plan was. But she didn't think there were enough teeth in it to guarantee that that would happen. The governor was willing to put more teeth in it. I negotiated on that with Governor Friedenthal, who had the lead on it originally and made great progress on it, and then Matt got to finish it up, and it's a plan that will work for Wyoming. And as I mentioned, the judge even admits it. I think with some of the nuclear option and the way judges can now be appointed, we're going to run into a lot more of that sort of thing.
So let's talk about something that your opponent, Democrat opponent Charlie Hardy's brought up. He's criticized you as part of a system of legal bribery, with your decisions dominated by lobbyists and determined by corporate funding. How do you respond to that?
Well, I'd like for somebody to point out where I've ever been legally bribed. I represent a lot of people. I represent Wyoming. Wyoming people help me out. Companies in Wyoming don't help me. Their employees help me. That's what a PAC is. It's individuals who want to go through their company to show their support, usually because they know where you stand, they know you don't compromise, they know that what you're going to do. I got a Lifetime Achievement Award from the coal industry. And of course, one of the reporters asked me if I'd worked on coal my whole life, and I said, not yet. But I was mayor of Gillette during the boom time, so I did the negotiations with the companies for industrial siting on every one of those plants to make sure that they were going to take care of the people that they brought, and that's kind of what saved Gillette was the help from the companies that we got, and a lot of that was from negotiations that we did. So I've worked with the companies. We had Pacific Power wanting to buy our electrical facilities, and Black Hills Corporation wanting to buy our electrical facilities. It was a real headache when I was mayor of Gillette, but it was one of the ways that the city was able to stay afloat during a boom time. And I know how to handle a bunch of the boom time problems, but they don't relate to anything that I've ever had with an interaction with companies or executives or anything like that.
So let's talk about something you're talking
I got to add one more thing on that. I got my training in the Wyoming legislature, and we learned real quickly that it's illegal to trade votes. That's considered a felony, and both parties are supposed to report it. And that sticks in the mind of all of us that have been trained in the Wyoming legislature.
So let's talk about some of your top contributors then. DaVita Healthcare Partners, Gilead Sciences, Murray Energy, with Blue Cross Blue Shield, Abbott Labs, Amgen, top contributors to your leadership pack. Some of these companies, and obviously there's some exceptions here, but some of these companies have zero or few ties to Wyoming. Why are they contributing to you? What are they getting for their money?
They're not getting anything for their money, but I am on health, education, labor, and pensions. That affects every company in America. And one of my big disappointments is that everybody else on that committee gets more money from those people than I do. It's almost embarrassing. But I don't try to raise that money, so I probably could get a lot more if I worked at it more. I was recently thrown into a situation where there was going to be a little contest for money because of a national race. This race became a national race for about 6 months, and that put some interest at the national level for people to contribute.
And that's one of the questions I have for you is, what are you doing with that campaign war chest? Where else are you spending it besides your own race?
Pretty much my own race. And I'm not spending all of it. I know that the newspapers and the radio stations and the TV stations would like to have me spend more. I'm a conservative, so I don't spend it all. Yeah.
So who would you consider your strongest allies in the Senate?
It depends a lot on the issue, but I work one-on-one with people. I'm able to work with almost everybody in the United States Senate. Some of them are easier to work with, some of them are more difficult to work with, but I can work with virtually all of them. That's how I've passed 100 bills while I've been there. You'll find that, well, they talk about this being the least productive Congress in 60 years. But in the last few months, I've passed 2 bills. Haven't heard much about them. One of them was a job training bill. We keep talking about jobs and the economy being real important. I worked on that for a long time. We finally got that passed. It passed 95-3. In the bills that I've passed, usually I have the most that I have voted against is 15, which means I find the common ground. I also leave out things that are important to both sides, but they're the ones that they clash on. And that's what's holding up Congress right now. We have this 10% on each side on most of the issues that come up that we're not going to agree on, we haven't agreed on, we probably never will agree on. But if we keep working trying to find a third way to do those, you can sometimes even do those. So sometimes bills come through almost 100%. One of the bills that we passed recently was one for additional autism research. That one passed unanimously. I know how to get the votes.
So you were one of 4 votes Democrats needed for a supermajority to bring up a minimum wage hike, and you said the following: these are jobs where we learn to be dependable, to work with other employees, and to learn that work ethic. And I think you gave some examples of jobs that you've held. Today's workers often, and just in kind of paraphrasing that part, you said you don't know how to interrupt their texting to wait on a customer. And with all due respect, for some of those earning minimum wage, it's their only job or one of several jobs. And I wondered if you're comfortable characterizing such Wyoming workers as lazy or inattentive.
No, I'm never comfortable doing that. I do hope that, and I do know that Wyoming kids are different than most of the other kids. They're a lot more independent, free-thinking, innovative, and interested in working. There's great work ethic in Wyoming. But I travel the country as well, and I wouldn't exempt people in Wyoming. I have gone into stores where I've tried to pay them money, and the person's busy talking on the telephone or texting. I talked to one employer who said that he was interviewing a person, and while he was interviewing the person, they took out their phone, did a bunch of typing, and put it back in and said, that was a friend of mine, I hope you didn't mind. You know, there's some work ethic things that we still need to work on, and people have talked about some of the, I had one person that came up to me and was talking about how I needed to help end the dead-end jobs. I said, what kind of jobs would those be? They said, well, fast food for one. There happened to be a young girl next to me who got real upset. She said, I'm working at one of those fast food places, and I started at minimum wage, but I've shown up on time, I wear the appropriate clothes, and I learn everything I can about the jobs there. I've been there 6 months, and I'm a supervisor. It's skills that are lacking that keep people at those lower ones. I'm visiting businesses right now. I'm on a Wyoming Works tour. Very exciting. I'll be in over 40 different kinds of businesses during this recess. And I'm finding out what kinds of jobs are available there, what kind of skills they need to have them. And then I'm going to go to over 20 job training centers to see if they're providing the skills. And that fits in with that bill that I passed for Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act. And some of that's already being used. So if we could get people into higher skill jobs, they would make more money. And raising everybody's wage doesn't put anybody ahead, because then you've got to raise the products as well. And so nobody gets ahead, but the federal government moves people into higher tax brackets and it raises money. And I was asked about that yesterday, and it was a person in agriculture, and they said, you know, we don't get to set our prices. The commodity market sets our prices. And so changing the minimum wage and the changes we'd have to do with the people within our organization, because if you raise it from $7 to $10, you got to raise 9 to 12 and 11 to 14 and so on, and maybe even more than that, because that's like a 30% increase in wage, so you maybe have to do a 30% increase. She said that would break the agricultural industry. I hadn't thought about that.
Yes, so maybe you can talk about something that you haven't accomplished over the course of the last term that you find kind of personally disappointing, and maybe how you'll endeavor to get it done going forward if you're reelected.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've got a lot of things that I've been working on that need to get finished. The biggest one is my penny plan. I've been working on that for a couple of years. We keep raising the debt limit, and I keep requesting that they have some kind of a plan to stop doing that, which means we've got to quit spending more than we take in. And the way my penny plan works is we just quit spending 1 cent out of every dollar that we currently spend, and the Congressional Budget Office tells me that would balance the budget in 3 years. I think if we did that, people would, as long as we cut the worst first. We had a sequester that was 2 3/10%, and the president sent out a message that said, make it hurt. And so the agencies picked their best thing, did that, so that people would complain and get it reinstated. Nobody does that in business. Nobody does that to their friends. We could cut the worst first, and at 1%, I don't think anybody would notice the difference for at least 3 years. But at the end of 3 years, I think they might say, you know, this has helped. Why don't we continue doing it? And the Congressional Budget Office again says if we did it for another 7 years, we'd be able to pay down $7 6/10 trillion worth of debt. And we've got to do that. We're borrowing money now at 1%, and our bill for interest alone is $231 billion a year. Imagine if that goes up to 5%. It's pretty simple math. We only spend $1 trillion now. We're in real trouble. So we've got to start paying that down. And I'm disappointed that I haven't gotten that done already. I've worked on it a couple of years, but it's not unusual to have to work 5 or 6 years to get a bill done, especially if you're working with people one at a time.
What's the obstacle to that, do you think? I mean, it seems like it's a pretty simple plan, pretty simple solution, pretty easy results to measure. What's the obstacle?
The obstacle was the sequester that we did at 2 3/10% that was done incorrectly, with cutting the best first instead of the worst first. I've been working on about 25 different bills that deal with health care. I was working on health care before the president became a senator, and I have a 10-step plan. I don't like doing comprehensive bills. Comprehensive bills get so big that nobody can understand them. You spend the same amount of time on a big bill that you do on a smaller bill, which means you don't really get to dig into it. You don't get to do the kind of amendments that you would do if it were a smaller bill. So we got 25 bills that would do a lot of the things that the president promised would be in health care, but isn't and won't be under his tutelage on it. I'm always disappointed when those get done. I've got one that has 79 co-sponsors. Normally that would just fly through, and the only reason it doesn't is Harry Reid won't bring it up. The president doesn't want to answer why that's in there.
Any other questions?
So I've got at least, so you talked about the penny plan. Give us maybe your top 3 or 4 priorities if you're reelected.
Well, I'd like to see us get education back to the states' rights where it's supposed to be. And I've got working on a bill that does that as well. And of course, I've mentioned health care already. That's got to be a top priority. I'd like to do some things on regulations, and I have a bill that would require that all regulations that Congress stipulates would have to have a majority vote in the House and the Senate before it could actually go into effect. That would really help us on the war on coal. A lot of the things that are coming up, there's no basis in law for them. They're going ahead and doing the regulations anyway. But if those came up before the Senate, I'm pretty sure they'd be defeated. I suspect they would in the House as well. We have a Congressional Review Act, and I'm the only one in the history of the Senate that's been able to use that and actually get it completed. If you read the Federal Register, I not only read the bills, I read the Federal Register, and you find a regulation, if you petition the people within 45 days and get enough signatures, you're guaranteed for 8 hours of debate on that and an up or down vote. I did that on Obamacare. It went straight down party lines, just like the original bill did. But if it had passed the House and passed the Senate, it would still had to have been signed by the President, and he wouldn't have signed it. But if it's a regulation that we're supposed to put in place, we ought to be the ultimate judges on it, not the President. So I'd like that's one I'd like to change. I have a number of small business proposals, and if we get the majority, I'll get to be the chairman of the subcommittee for tax reform. And as the accountant on the finance committee, I'm really excited about that. It's what I wanted to do since I got there. So there are ways we could make it simpler and easier and fairer, and that's what it needs to be. We don't need 70,000 pages to tell us how to pay our taxes.
Do you have a plan in mind?
Well, I've worked a number of plans with people, and I think it's possible to get it done. Again, I hope it would be done in stages rather than comprehensively, so that people could be sure that we're not running into unintended consequences. One of the big problems that we'll have, people have proposed eliminating some things. One of them is in a way that inventory tax is done, and I won't go into the details on that, but I can tell you that if it happened, it would bankrupt every company in America, because inflation has set in since the time that they've accounted for their inventory, and so I've suggested that anything that we make in the way of a change needs to have a transition. And I've been working on a lot of different transitions for things that people have proposed as cuts. And I've worked on it enough now that the chairman of the committee, if somebody takes him a tax proposal, says, well, you better talk to Enzi about how you're going to transition this. So we need to make sure that we wind up with a tax system that is simpler and fairer, and one that doesn't put people out of business just because it is a good change.
So last question for me, sorry. And so you know what America's perception of Congress is right now. It's not particularly high, but their perception of their individual congressman or congresswoman is very much better in a lot of respects. What's your role in changing America's perception of the work that's being done in Washington as an individual senator?
Yeah. Well, my 80% rule is catching on. I indoctrinate a few people on it all the time. I've even had a couple of the committee chairmen that are Democrats come to me and ask me how I was able to get so many bills passed when I was the chairman and Kennedy was the ranking member, and then he was the chairman and I was the ranking member, and we got bills done that had been languishing out there 10 or 12 years. And the way the 80% rule works is it requires civility. If you talk to people about the issues civilly, there are about 80% of them that you can maintain civility. And if you stick to those 80%, and most of us know what those are, you can find a bill or 2 or 5 or 20 or 100 that you can pass 80%. And it usually relies on leaving things out. Because I mentioned this 10% that we keep butting our heads on. Everybody knows the code words that go with them. So all somebody has to do is say one of those words, and the other side jumps in with the defense using their constant words. And neither side has to listen to the other side. So we got to get them listening to each other and talking civilly and finding out the 80% of the common ground. And there really is 80% common ground on a lot of issues. And those are the ones I think that the American public expect us to do.
Thanks.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for coming in. We
Sure.
appreciate the chance to visit with you again.
Thank you for your questions.
Yeah, thank you.